All right, so hi everyone. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about components of developing the article. So we'll start off very generally, and then we're going to go to the specifics that relate to your particular contribution to the article. So as you know, I've read all of your annotated bibliographies, and from that, I was able to pull material that I could use to assess how we can develop this into an article in which we provide our own critical analysis and our own perspective of things. So I see that not everyone is here, but because of time, my time especially, I'm going to go ahead and hopefully your teammates can look at this the recording here and be able to contribute. All right, so let's start off with a PowerPoint that I've created. And I'm going to go ahead and project this. All right, so I have two devices, so I can see if you guys have any comments, but feel free to ask questions as we're going through these slides. So again, we're going to start off generally about things that we can do in order to prepare for this article and organize, and then specifics about your contributions. All right, let's see. I always have a little problem here when it freezes. Here we go. All right, so these are the main points that we're going to talk about. Developing a reference library using EndNote. So as I mentioned previously, I do want everyone to use EndNote, to use a referencing library for the purposes of being able to share the information in a way that makes it easy for us to be able to access these references, but also for my purposes of being able to compile everything at the end. We're all going to talk about developing figures in terms of just the general practices. I'm actually not going to show you necessarily how to make a figure, but more specifically, the details that we need to keep in mind in order to keep things consistent. As part of that is also, if we want to use published figures, how to obtain permission to be able to do so, because we cannot simply take a figure from the literature and apply it into our review article. We actually have to get the copyright permission. And then finally, how do we go about compiling this manuscript? All right, so let's first start off with the use of EndNote. And obviously, there are other programs that are available for this purpose. But what I will ask you, if you want to use another program, it must be compatible with EndNote. And if it's not, then you will have to use EndNote. So there are a few of you that I know that have access to EndNote. If you do not, you're welcome to use any one of my computers in my lab to be able to upload, create your reference library so that it becomes part of the reference library for this particular review article. All right, so what does a referencing software allow you to do? Well, it allows you to create a library and to be able to keep things in an orderly fashion. So you can preserve your references, and it enables you to be able to, in a very rapid way, format your references according to journal requirements. And so I'm going to talk a bit about how you can, if your particular version of EndNote does not have the template for the journal, how you can go about finding that template online. And also this allows for easy sharing of references. All right, so how to use EndNote. I'm going to show you an example of being able to upload an article. So I'm going to show you an example from uploading from PubMed and also from a journal. Then I will show you how, once that particular article is in your library within EndNote, how you can go about referencing it in a writing sample, and then how you can add a journal EndNote template. So what I'm going to do here is a mix a little bit using the internet so that we can see how we can go about doing this. All right, so just to show you, when you do download EndNote, it will become part of your Word template. And so you would see that, and see if I can actually see what you guys see. You can see that there is an actual icon that is created for you to be able to access the EndNote. So in this context, I have EndNote X7. What I would do is I would click on it. And the next thing that I would do is that I would go ahead and say, go to EndNote. And so that would take me to the actual program. So here, what I have done is I've created a particular EndNote document that is going to be for this review article. So it's called Cytochrome C Review, and it's going to be here where I will start to compile all of your libraries into one library that will become the official one for this manuscript. So as you can see here, I have nothing available, although I can show you examples, let's see, of ones that I have for my laboratory work. Let's see. Let's see an example. Actually, it's already in there, so let's see if I can find it. All right, here's the example of mine. So I have 1,709 references in here, and so here I'm able to keep track of things. So I probably don't use EndNote as efficiently as some other people do, just because I don't want to overload my EndNote. So some people actually download the complete article and then preserve it into EndNote so that they can easily access it. I don't often do that just because of how heavy it can become, but just to give you a perspective. All right, so let's go through the example of how we can go about adding references into this program. So an example is, let's look at it here, over here. All right, so let's say that I want to go to PubMed. Let's find some sort of article. So Cytochrome C, PubMed, let's see if we can find any article in there. All right, so for instance, we have this article, Cytochrome C functions beyond respiration. And let's say that I am interested in using this particular article. I download it, I read it, I think that it was really helpful. So something that I can do is try to add it to my library. So there's often a section in PubMed, although the page of PubMed has changed from what it was just even a few months ago. So some of this can be a little bit new to me. So what you can do is download, for instance, when you go into this icon here in PubMed, you will see that there's a section called Cite. So you would just click on Cite, and then you can download the actual reference. You say open, hit OK, and it will actually upload it directly into your EndNote library. So here you can see that it's present. So it has all the information that corresponds to that particular manuscript. So I wouldn't necessarily trust that it is 100% perfect, in the sense that there may be some things that need to be reformatted. So generally speaking, it has recognized that this reference is a journal article. So there are different formats that you can have your references in. It is a journal article. You have the details of the author, the year, the title, the journal. Sometimes you do need to change a few things around because it can be missing certain details, like it can be possibly missing page numbers, and so you need to insert that information in. Sometimes I've noticed that you can have a journal name and then an alternate journal, and then when you're trying to put this article into your list of references, it can confuse the name just because of the alternate journal name. So if you see that there's something going a little bit funny in terms of the citation name, go back into your EndNote file and then look at what's going on here, because you might actually have to alter the alternate journal name. Sometimes actually delete it just because of that purpose, that it sometimes confuses the titles. All right, so this is a way that you can get the information for a particular article directly from PubMed. So another way that you can potentially do this is by going into a journal article from the actual website. So let's see if we can do this here. So for instance, I'm looking at an article that comes from the ACS Publications Journal of the American Chemical Society here. So obviously this particular article, the effects of sodium ions on ligand binding and conformational states of G protein coupled receptors, that doesn't really pertain to our particular manuscript, but I just want to give you the example of how you can potentially upload this into your EndNote file. So here, this particular layout allows us to be able to do this. So what we can do is go to, let's say you really want to use this in your library, go to where you see over here, export, and you want to export the RIS. So you'll click on this icon, and then you can choose which of the features you want to include that will go into your EndNote library. So in this case, I'm going to click on citation. Okay, and then what I'll do is go ahead and click on OK. And what you'll see is that it actually uploads that into your EndNote document. And so again, do a quick check to see if it has the major information that you will need as part of your citation. And so this one appears to have the information that I'll need. Again, later on, if there's anything funny, you can always go back to EndNote library and modify things, because this is not set in stone. You have the capability of editing. All right, so I wanted to just give you the examples of how you can pull references from either directly from the journal. Often journals make it accessible so that you can download the information that corresponds to the article, or you can pull it from PubMed. And there are other ways that you can do this. These are not the only ways that you can do this. There are multiple things that you can do in Google Scholar and other referencing databases. But these are just some examples that you guys can take advantage of in order to build up your EndNote library. All right, so now that you have that information, so let's say we have these two articles that are available in my EndNote document or my EndNote file. All right, so let's say that I want to then add these references into my manuscript. All right, so let's say we go into Word, and right now I have an empty Word document. All right, so let's say that we want to add something here. For instance, cytochrome C is an important protein. All right, so something generic like that. All right, so we have that statement, and let's say that we want to reference that statement because it's something that's not necessarily trivial, that you would need some support in order to make that claim. So what you can do here then is use EndNote, and in this case, I've already have the EndNote available. I've clicked on it previously, and let's say that I want to add the reference right here. So what I would do is I will go into the EndNote file. Let's say that I want to add this particular article as my reference for that statement. So I'll click on this article. I can use Tool, and then in Tool, I can click on the icon Cite while you write. Click on that, and then I can say Insert Selected Citation. So that's going to, when I click on this, what that would do is going to add it into my Word document. And as you can see here, now we have the citation. And remember, we have to do this as in-text citation. And it already starts to build my references at the bottom. And I can actually label this as references, or however the journal wants us to label this particular section of the manuscript. And so we have this in a certain format. So right now, I actually have it. If you look in the icon that corresponds to the EndNote X7, I actually have it in the style of the publisher. So the journal that we're going to submit to, which is Inorganics, is part of the MDPI publishing company. And so they have a particular style that they use. And so I've actually have applied that particular style. But I will say to you that it does happen that publishers or even a specific journal may change its format. So you have to make sure to double check an article that was recently published or the instructions for authors, in which I will show you guys where you can access that information, to make sure that the format that you see here matches the requirement of the particular journal or the publishers. And so here I already preset my style to be for the MDPI. I have a few different styles here. For instance, I could have set it for, let's say, Journal of American Chemical Society if I was writing a paper for that particular journal. And by clicking on that style, you see that the format has now changed and is adapted now to that particular style. I can show you another example. Let's say that I want to submit this to Nature, okay? And so now that gets formatted for Nature, referencing format. But again, double check that the particular style that you're using matches what is the current journal's requirement, okay? Because there are changes that do occur over time. All right, so that gives us a perspective of how we can use this. And within the actual EndNote, you can find the different styles. So here, for instance, as I mentioned to you, that there may be some modifications to the referencing format of a particular journal. You have the capacity of going into a particular journal style or publisher style and editing yourself. I will be a little bit cautious. I'm actually not going to show you the full details of how to do that, but I'll just give you just sort of an introduction to it so that you can play around with it yourself. So for instance, you can go into the tab Edit, go down to Output Styles. Okay, so Output Styles here. And let's say that we want to edit a format. So let's say here, I want to edit the PNAS. So that's a particular journal. And so what will open up is the format for referencing for this journal. And so there are different tabs that correspond to the citation, to the bibliography, and then whether or not you use footnotes or figures and tables. All right, so there are different features with regards to how it will appear in your document. I will not go into the details here because it can get a little bit tricky. And so I don't want to lose you on details that at this point are not so important. But the key thing for you to know is that you have the capacity of editing EndNote so that you fine tune it to the format of the journal that you're interested in. All right, so just wanted to let you know that you have that capacity to be able to do that. All right, another thing that I wanted to show you is, let's say that in the list of journal types that are available. All right, so there are, if you click on this icon here, you can say select another style. Okay, and so within EndNote, there should be a large collection of styles. Okay, so in this context, you have a large variety, but there could be a case where maybe the journal that you want to submit to, that style, or even the publisher style, is not in your EndNote. All right, so you can create your own style. So you can actually create your own referencing format, or, to save yourself some time, you can Google whether or not that particular style is available. So for instance, let's see if we can do this. Let's open up a search, and let's say that we want to find the MDPI EndNote template. Let's see, I did just a quick search for that. And if you know that the very first hit that we have here actually corresponds to what we're looking for. So it says here, MDPI ACS journals, whatever that actually means. So we have to look at that to make sure that that's the correct MDPI that we're talking about. And according to this, it's been dated for February 17, 2021. All right, so let's go ahead and click on this. All right, so we click on this, and so what we see here are the details that corresponds to what this pertains to. And so you look through this, and at the very bottom, you can actually see where it says download style. So you click on that, and then you download it, and it's actually going to go into your EndNote, your EndNote program. All right, so you have the capacity of entering templates into your EndNote, and then that now becomes a feature as part of your use. But again, double check to make sure that the format that you've downloaded matches what is expected. And if not, you can then fine tune it by editing it for your own purposes. All right, so I just wanted to give you an overview because I do want us to use EndNote for the ease of being able to share it, but also for the ease for you to be able to create your library and be able to quickly reference things. So you're not wasting time, because one of the worst things is to write a document, and at the end of all that work, then you have to start adding in your references. It can become very time consuming, and it also can lead to duplications. You don't want that to happen. All right, so by this method, you can actually help to save yourself time and save yourself duplications. All right, so those are the main features that I wanted to discuss with regards to the use of EndNote and being able to manipulate it so that it pertains to the actual journal that you're writing for. All right, the next thing that I wanted to touch upon was the idea of developing figures. And so again, I'm not going to sit here and start drawing all these fancy figures. Okay, I will leave this up to you guys to figure out this component. But what I do want to focus on is the importance of figures, because one of the key things about writing a scientific article, whether it's a primary research article or whether it's a review article, is that you have to focus on the storytelling. You want something that is compelling, that will be interesting to your audience. And so you have to think about the use of figures as it can add to the storytelling. And oftentimes the use of figures helps to minimize the amount of explanation that you have to give, because you don't want a document that's just full of words, as it would just bore your audience. So it's very important to consider the development of figures. And something that I often do with regards to my own articles and development of the research that I do is I often pre-plan my figures. So I sketch out my figures and I try to see what would be an efficient way of telling something. And often I will start to build my story around these sketches that I have. Right, but there are a few things that I want you to keep in mind. As you know, this is a fairly big class, and so many people are going to be doing their their own contributions. Obviously, the expectation is that you guys are going to collaborate. But one of the key things to help maintain a consistent style is to follow the following. So I emphasize, please pre-size your figures. And I say this often because sometimes those students that do not pre-size their figures have a lot of work later on. All right, so what do I mean by that? What I mean is that you want to know how big you want to make your figure. As it turns out that for this particular journal, they don't do double columns. They do an actual, like a more of a traditional Word type of document in terms of the layout. So you have more flexibility in terms of the size of your figures. When you're working with, let's say, an ACS publication, you will have double columns. And so then you have to make a choice of whether a figure will be one column or whether it will be two columns. And another major factor is that you often have a limitation of the size of how much you can actually publish. And so you really have to think about how much you're going to use it for your figure and how much you're going to need in order to be able to tell your story. So often you have to balance that, and you don't want to just randomly make figures of whatever size, because you actually will get rejected if you do not present something that is of a professional quality. So to ensure consistency, it's important to create your figures at the size that you want them to appear at the end. All right. So don't arbitrarily make your figures whatever size you want. Pre-size them. And so I often will decide for myself, even if I'm writing for the MDPI journal, whether I want to make it to look like a smaller figure that would be typical of a one-column figure, or whether I want to make it look like a two-column figure. So that still stays in my mind because it helps me in formatting. All right, but how can you help yourself to pre-size? So you can use a really fancy program to make your figures, or you can use something as simple as PowerPoint to make your figures. If you use PowerPoint, my suggestion to you is to frame your document so that it's already of a width that will now contain the figure that you're going to make. All right, so what do I mean by that? So let's say I'm going to exit out here for a moment, and we're going to go back to over here. So I'm actually going to be in PowerPoint, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a document. And so I'm going to go open up a new document. And here, what I'm going to do is to change the size of this document. So here, for instance, I'm going to go to the tab Design. And in Design, I'm going to go into the slide size. So I'm going to click on the slide size, and I'm going to click on Custom Slide Size. All right, so here then, I can modify the width and the height. And so here is the general rule of thumb. If you're making something that would be equivalent to a one-column figure, then the width of that will be 3.25, okay? If you're making something that's the equivalent of a double column figure, then typically that would be a 7-inch width for the figure, all right? So let's go with 3.25, okay? And then the height, well, the height doesn't really matter so much because you can actually adjust that. What's more important is to maintain the width, so you create things within that context. But you can also adjust the height so that you already have it in the format that you want. So let's say that I want to make it a square shape, so 3.25 by 3.25. Let's go ahead and say okay. All right, and so here I have it in that format, and so it looks bigger than it actually is because I have this amplified in terms of the size. So this is what it would look like. Okay, so have it at the dimension that would actually appear in the journal, because you want to make sure to your eye that you can see everything that you have in that figure with clarity. Because if you can't see it with clarity, then you have to adjust your figure. That is why try to avoid having this at a really large magnification, because yes, perhaps at 400% you can see things very beautifully, but then when you bring it back down to the size that it should be in terms of the actual format, if you can't see it, it's definitely not going to look good in your manuscript. And sure, this particular journal will be an online journal, right? So it's an online publication, but you don't want to require your audience to have to magnify every single figure to be able to see them. It just simply it's not a very good thing to do. All right, so you want to make sure that you have this in the size, and as you create it, that you can see it very comfortably in that format. All right, so I'm going to help in this process. All right, so let's go to the back to the PowerPoint, because I want to emphasize a few other things. So you want to format your figures, all right, into a certain size, again, pre-size. And then if you create a figure and you're adding text, it's very important. So the common one to use is Arial font. That's very commonly, especially in the ACS journals, as far as the text. Black color, okay, and make sure that it is in black color, because sometimes the color that appears is actually gray, is not black. And then you want the text to be a small, but not small that you can't see it. So typically a 9-point is a good size. All right. Now let's say that you want to make a plot, because again, a review article is not something that you're just reporting something. You actually are analyzing. And so you can create figures that are analysis based on material that has been published. So let's say that you want to make a plot. So I'm going to just give you an example of a very simple plot that you can make, not because I want to show you something beautiful, but mostly is to maintain consistency of the format. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Excel to create a plot. And I want to use Excel just to emphasize a few different things that I would like to see. All right, so I'm going to exit out of here for a moment. I'm going to go into Excel. All right, so in Excel, what I've done, let's just make this big so you guys can see this. Okay, I created what will be something that will be for a linear trend. All right, so I created X and Y. And so what I'm going to do with this information is I'm going to plot it. All right, so this is actually really simple. So you want to plot in Excel. I'm pretty sure you guys have all taken analytical chemistry, so you are brilliant and probably even superior than me at using Excel. All right, but there are going to be things about how you create a figure that I absolutely do not want to see, but that students do it a lot, and it's kind of a pet peeve, but definitely for a publication, there will be a no-go. I do not want to see chart titles. Absolutely get rid of that. So that is immediate to go. I don't want to see these lines in here. So those must go, absolutely must go, okay? And so a few different things. You can begin the pre-sizing format even within the plotting document. So for instance, here, if you click on here and you click on format, you can see the size of this plot, and you can automatically see over here, okay, that the height is 3 inches and the width is 5 inches. So let's imagine that we're creating what would be equivalent to a 1-column figure, right? This is already violating that dimension. So what you can do is, let's say that we create this into a 3.25 width, all right? That'll be the maximum width. But this particular plot here is a straight line. It really is not that particularly interesting. So you don't need to make this a height of 3. It absolutely does not need to be 3 inches. It absolutely does not need to be this big. So what you can do here is size this perhaps, let's say 1.5. That seems to be much more reasonable for what the material is, right? If this was a much more complex figure, then perhaps give it a little bit more room. But definitely do not make this super huge when you're not really giving anything that's that informative. All right, so here, a few things that I want you to keep note of. So if you look closely, the colors are actually not something that you want to see in your figure, because when you put it into your document, they will appear very light. So you want to make everything be consistent. So for instance, here, if you look, that is of a different font. And remember, I told you, typically you use for your font Arial. So you go ahead and make that Arial. okay? And then you want to make sure that there's actually black. So click on black, okay? So there's actually black to see the difference between these numbers and then the numbers to the left, all right? Here, do the same thing, make that Arial. And I know this seemed all trivial, and I know that you guys know all this, but I'll tell you, I say this often, and students still give me figures that are not correct. So we want to avoid having to go through the please change your figures, that whole talk, so that we all maintain consistency. All right, so that's one thing. Okay, we got that part fixed. The next thing we need to do is make sure that the lines are the right format. So we're going to click here, and then if you note, this line here that forms the x-axis is actually not the right color. So what you do is make it the right color. What we'll do is make that black, okay? And to make it something that can be seen in an article, my suggestion is to make the width 1 point, okay, just like we have here. Another thing that's often I like to see are markers, and it helps people visually. So we're going to add tick marks. The type of tick marks that I do like to see are those that are outside, like that, okay? And so that helps people, and just to kind of capture like a certain point that they might be able to use for their own purposes. All right, so we would do the same thing over here. We would make everything consistent, everything black, the lines 1 point for this purpose, and then we can even change this color. Let's see. Actually, I have this as a different format. This is actually the shading. But anyways, we can make this into the color black. Sorry, I clicked on something different. But anyways, make the points black. You can add a curve if you want to, But even that, I want that to not be a dashed line. It's nice to have your fit there. All right, so this is just a representation of how to make a figure. Obviously, I don't love this figure because it's not the coloration that I want, but that's something that you guys, I know that you are able to fine tune to the correct point. What I want to do is to make sure that we can be able to insert this into our actual template. Did not mean to do that. Let's see. Outside. All right. So we take this. I actually do want to get rid of the border. I do not like seeing borders. All right, so we'll take this information and we'll put this into our pre-size thing. All right, and so you have something like that. Okay, and so now you're basically ready to go in terms of having it into the size. You can actually insert this as a figure as opposed to maintaining the connection to Excel. It depends on you. However, when you give this any of your figures, if you do end up making a plot, make sure that you lose that connection Excel, provide it as an actual figure, and save it in a high resolution. All right. The key thing is that when I open it up into the final document, it needs to be high resolution because that is the expectation from the publishers. All right. So here, even though the frame is bigger than I want, right, you can still make this into a figure, and then you can crop out the excess space. The key thing is that this is within the frame of the dimensions that I want. All right, so as best you can, pre-size your figures and make sure that you can see it. So this is at the correct dimensions that would be in the actual paper, that we have the actual Arial font and the coloration that's correct. All right, so that's basically what I want to emphasize as far as consistency of figures. Another thing that I want to mention to you guys is take advantage of commercial programs to help you in the creation of your figures. I know that we're not all artists. I definitely am not an artist. So tomorrow, as I've mentioned a few times, Josue Benjamin is going to give a workshop on how to use Pymo for the creation of figures that are related to crystal structures, or protein crystal structures. Another thing that you guys can use is the program BioRender. All right, so I actually have access to it. I will give you my access to it so you guys can use it. I have not used it, to be honest. I obtained the license for it to be able to use it with my lab students, but I actually have not used it. So I wouldn't be the best source for teaching you guys how to use it. I myself need to train myself because I have to write a grant application soon. But I can refer to Andrea, who is part of your team. She has used it. And most recently, she used it for her presentation for the RU PR Climb program, all right? And so she can give you guys an orientation. Although, as far as I understand, it is pretty self-explanatory as far as using the program. So I will, separate from this, because I don't want to provide this recording online, I will provide you separate from this my access to it. I ask that you keep that access amongst the group, right? Because that is my own, all right? So do not share this with other people. All right, moving on. All right, so then, still related to figures, is this concept of obtaining permission to use published figures. So oftentimes, it is worthwhile to include something that's from the published literature, because sometimes something is so captivating in terms of how the authors portrayed a particular key points that it's probably best to use that figure. But there are a few things that we have to keep in mind. So obviously, we need to get permission. And how do we get this permission? So I'm going to give you an example of how you guys can go about getting permission. Now, the thing is, you're not required, once you have the permission, you're not required to use the whole figure. Let's say you just want to use a part of it. You have that ability to modify the figure, and you have to let them know that you're going to adapt it for your purposes. Because sometimes I will take, let's say, a multi-panel figure and only use one panel, because that one panel I want to build around it. So that's perfectly fine. Again, you still need the permission to even use that one panel, but still, is the permission to have access to the whole thing. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of how we can get permission directly from the publishers. All right, so again, I'm going to exit out of here for a moment, okay? And I'm going to go and show you an example. So let's go back to that Jack's article, the one that I included in my library that has no relevance to Cytochrome C, but it was still helpful just to give you the example. All right, so if you notice in this article, okay, this is the same layout for all of the, I believe for all the ACS journals. If you look here, there is a tab that's called Rights and Permission, all right? What you would do is you would actually click on that, okay? And so here then, it actually gives you some information about how you can go about requesting information, all right? So you would go about then following the guidelines to be able to access this information. Let's actually see something else. Because I actually wanted to open something else. Let's see if I can find that. Let me see. There should be something a little bit more interactive here. I actually wanted to show you something a little bit more. I probably should have kept it from, let's see if I can find it. No, I cannot find it at the moment. I wanted to show you the page that will typically open up when you want to give them a specific set of information. Okay, let's see something here. I'm trying to go into a different, because that's not actually too helpful with that page that I just clicked on. Requested. Let's see. Let's see. I would know. Now, I'm not sure why it's taking me roundabout right now. All right, but I will find the link, because there's actually a direct link, at least for the ACS journals, where in that link, what you would do is you would tell them what particular figure in a paper that you want to use, what's the purpose, for instance, you want to publish it in your own manuscript, Okay, and then what an output of that, and I will create the information for you guys so you can more directly be able to see this, because this is not the actual page for linking to it. But let's go back to the presentation, because there's a few things I want to mention about this. All right, so what it will actually tell you is it will give you the permission, but sometimes there will be a fee associated with the permission. So do not stress out about that. You're never going to be expected to pay for anything. Okay, I have a budget for this paper, and so it's a limited budget to be able, if there's a figure that we want to use and it's a reasonable price, then we can go ahead and get that permission. But I will say, if there's a figure that's extremely expensive, then we have to make a judgment call. The judgment call is, how important or how valuable is this figure that we need to include, or could we potentially create our own figure using materials, like Pymol and other accessories, to be able to capture the key points that we would like to make. All right, so there is where we do have to make a judgment call. Now, if a figure is free, then that's great, but still, even if a figure is free, there's still going to be that judgment call to make, because even published figures may not meet, let's say, our criteria for high quality. Some figures, unfortunately, are published with low resolution, and that low resolution is the only thing that's available, and we may not necessarily want to keep that low resolution figure in our own publication. All right, so this is something to think about, that the use of a published figure is valuable, especially if it contains something very captivating, but we don't want something that's going to offset our budget. And especially if it's something that we can very easily create ourselves and be able to fine-tune for our particular needs. Again, we don't want to plagiarize a figure, but if we can capture certain key things into our own creation, that's going to be something that's very important. All right, so before I continue on, I want to stop for a moment and ask you guys, do you have any questions about what I have discussed so far? All right, any questions?
I have I just want to add something. I have requested permission for some figures of an article in the past, so I basically have basically the process to to do that. If anyone, for example, it was for Chem, so the European Journal. So if someone needs to do that,
can we do it now?
Huh?
Can we do it now? So tell me how to go there, because I actually had found the ACS one very easily before, and then I don't know why it threw me to something totally different. Let's see.
Basically, this is what should I send it on the chat or
Chem. I'm going to it right now. Can you see that? Let's see. Okay, so we're in Chem. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, what he said is go to the article, the paper that you want to ask permission for reproducing any type of figure.
So this article right here.
You say click on tools.
Click on tools.
Yeah. Click on request permission.
So I don't have that here.
No, I'm sorry. Let me see. I have done that.
There's another.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see. If you can click on the.
I'm on the right side now. It says supporting information.
The tools is, for example, for my particular case. Let me.
It normally is within the article itself for getting the actual permission.
Yeah. And if you look at
Mhm.
and top of the actual abstract,
Yes.
you don't see anything that says tools.
Yeah, I'm actually clicking on tools,
Okay.
but it doesn't actually have that feature of the of getting that.
On request of permission.
Yeah.
This is it. He actually sent me the whole process, and I did it, and it works perfectly. It
Yeah, I'm
worked.
not sure why the links are not there. They're supposed to be there, because it's actually a pretty straightforward process. That's why
Yes.
I'm not sure if for some reason
May-
maybe my browser that's creating this issue. But I was
Maybe,
able to just do that pretty easily before.
maybe can you use a other article or something?
Yeah,
Maybe.
that's what I'm looking for right now. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, let's find a different article from a different issue. Right here, yes, this article, just like you were saying. So a different article, request permission. All right,
Yes.
click on request permission.
Yes. Then select we use and
Oh,
dissertation. No, in my case,
yeah,
it
yeah.
would be
So,
we use and
well, when I mentioned to everyone, this is the exact same output that we would have gotten from ACS, and I'm not sure why it didn't link me to this. So this is the exact same thing. It's called the Copyright Clearance Center. Okay, so this is generally speaking what you have to go through in order to get the permission. So then you get this series of questions. So welcome to Write Links. And so here it said, well, I would like to question mark. And so you make a selection. So here we make the selection. And so then here you will, for whatever purposes you want. So for instance, Lewis is writing his thesis. So let's say that he wants to use something in his thesis. For here it says reuse in a dissertation thesis. All right, for our purposes, we want to publish something. So for instance, we want to say reuse in a journal magazine. All right, so that's what we would want to do. So let's say, go ahead and we'll click on this. Okay. So then here, what we'll do is, okay, so the very first question, it leads to a whole bunch of other questions. So I would like to reuse in a journal magazine. Then requester type would be, well, we're not the author of this article. What would we be? We would be a university or academic. I think that's the correct one.
Yeah.
What do you think, Louis? Is that correct?
yeah.
Okay. University academic. Okay. Then the next thing it says, is the reuse sponsored by or associated with a pharmaceutical or medical products company? Okay. And then the obvious answer to that would be no. And then format.
I selected the print and electronics.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Even if this publication will be electronic, click on both, and then if for instance it gives you a price, then try to redo it and click on electronic to see if there's any different. This is going to be an electronic publication. It was click on both, and then it says portion, full article, text extract, figure table abstract. Say in this case the figure table. All right.
Table. Yeah.
Right, and then here it says the number of figures and tables. All right, then you'll put in that information. Let's say there's a little question thing here. It says
That says translated.
figures, tables, images indicates the number of figures, tables, or images from the publisher that you're licensing permission to use. So you don't have to specify any particular figure in this case. You just say how many you want to use. So let's say in a particular article you want to just use one. We'll put in one here. The next thing is, will you be translating? Okay.
No.
So in this case, it will be no. And then circulation. Well, that one is a little tricky because it's like, I guess, how much access. And so that one, I really don't have a good answer for this one. We can be conservative and say something low, but I don't really have a good answer for that one. All right. And then it says select your currency. So in this case, we'll put in the US dollar, and then we'll say, let's click on quick price. So click on quick price. And for this particular article, the price is 0. Okay. And so that's the quick price. So then now what we would do is we're going to say continue. Okay. And so then here we do have to create, we do have to have an account. All right. So what I could do or what Lewis can do, either one of us, we can create an account that would be used for us for this purposes, so that then you type in the login information, you will log in, and then you will request that permission. And then what will happen next is that they will review your request, and then they will send you that permission. Oftentimes the permission is right away, or it might be sent to you by email. So in your case, Lewis, was it right away?
Yes, it was right away.
Okay, so
and I had to use 11 figures.
he used 11 figures, and hopefully they were free. All right, so in this case, right, that's what we would do. All right, guys. So it's actually a straightforward thing. I'm not sure why when I clicked on whatever I did on ACS, it threw me somewhere else. It should open up a window like this. It should be very straightforward. It should not be this complex roundabout way of requesting permission. Now, there are some journals that don't have a link necessarily to this method, but nonetheless, they tend to simplify in such a way that it's easy for you to access. Thank you, Lewis, for asking this question and showing us this example. All right. Anyone else?
Una preguntita, en caso de que en ese caso hubiese salido algún costo por el uso de esa figura.
Sí, en este caso salió $0, pero sí, a veces sale un costo, puede ser, vamos a decir, 20, a veces sale más de $100, right? So, en ese caso tenemos que pensar, ¿vale esta figura?
¿Vale la pena usarla o no?
Ajá. O tal vez podemos crear nuestra propia figura, pero la cosa es que no podemos ser plagiarism, ¿ok? Hay que evitar algo así. Pero si hay alguna idea de esa figura, tú puedes ilustrarlo en tu manera, ¿verdad? Then go ahead and do that, right? And you guys are working in teams, so maybe you're not yourself and not necessarily the artist, but maybe you can ask one of your classmates, your teammates, to help you to create that visual, okay? The key thing is I've emphasized, what are the main things? Pre-size your figures, all right? I'm going to be really annoying about that, but pre-size your figures. Make sure that the font is Arial, black, 9-point, so that it's visual. You can see it in the actual manuscript, right? So those are the key things that I want to see. Do not put lines around your figures. Just make sure that we all consistently do not do that, all right? In that way, then, at the end, we have as consistent as possible the figures, so that if there's anything that Lewis and I need to do, we might not have to manipulate things. We might have to reach out to you and say, can you help us to either modify figure, or perhaps we might need to, not because you did something wrong, but we might need to edit a figure, and so we might need to get the original document so that we can manipulate the figure itself. All right, guys, so that's something to keep in mind. Developing your own figures versus obtaining permission for published figures. I have no problem with the use of published figures, but keep in mind that there is a limited budget. It's not going to come from your pockets, but nonetheless, keep in mind that as if it is coming from your pockets, you don't want to be just wasteful in that regard. Okay, so now let's go to the compiling the manuscript. I already emphasized telling a compelling story. You want to appeal to your audience, preferably a broad audience. And so the way I've divided this work is to be as appealing and as general as we can get. Now, the key thing is to, let me put this in PowerPoint format, to use simple but formal language, all right? And that is, you want to be as concise as possible, because you basically, again, a review article is not reporting something. You're not just saying, oh, this happened in the paper and we move on to the next paper. That is not effective storytelling, is not an effective perspective review. So you want to be as concise as possible at reaching the heart of whatever you're talking about within a particular article. So remember that there is beauty in simplicity and brevity. Avoid fancy vocabulary that's going to just confuse people. And then another really important thing is always refer to the journal's instruction for authors. All right. Every journal has an instruction for authors, and I will ask you guys to read them. If you go to the MDPI Publishers Inorganics journal, you will see in there that there is a tab that's instructions for authors. You would go ahead and click on that, and it has a lot of instructions for authors. Okay. I encourage you, please read them, okay, because they actually provide you a template, and I'm going to ask you, each team, to write the manuscript in the template that corresponds to the MDPI, all right? And as you can see in the submission checklist, it says right there, use the Microsoft Word template. So you will go ahead and you will create your template. You will use that template, and everyone is going to work in this one template. And so when you submit your manuscript, you're going to submit it as one document, the whole team. Another really important thing, guys, this is an English journal, so we're going to have to write in English. So I am A-okay with course material being in Spanish. However, for the review article, the language will have to be English, all right? So I am here to help out to improve the English, all right? So don't be afraid of going into this language. I'm here to help you out. So is Lewis. But the thing is that you now have to start, translating your work in so that it is in English. But I do ask you to please read the material here for you to become familiar with the process of publishing, because this may not be the only manuscript that you publish. You want to be familiar with the process that the journal asks you to use. All right, so now we're going to go into the actual outline. And so I have, based on what you guys have provided, I've looked at who are the key players. I don't know if this is how you guys see it. So for the first part, explore, select anti-cancer drugs that operate by perturbing the mitochondrial membrane and triggering cytochrome C release, all right? These were the key players that I identified: Alondra, Amanda, Javier, Omar, Rafael, Miguel, okay? When I looked at Omar's annotated bibliography, I actually found that his very first article would serve as a very good building block for this section of the manuscript, as it provides sort of an overview of compounds that really feeds into a mechanism that deals with mitochondrial membrane perturbation in this particular activity. All right, but something that I also outlined here was what I observed in terms of the type of compounds that you were looking at. So here, just what I observed. Alondra had platinum compounds. I saw that Amanda had 5-fluorouracil. Javier had one article about a pro-apoptotic peptide that was pretty interesting. Both Rafael and Miguel talked about nitric oxide delivery. In a way, the use of that small molecule was actually interesting because it appears to be able to overcome some limitations of certain cell lines that actually have a sort of a defect in terms of the mitochondrial apoptosis mechanism. And so I thought that was actually pretty interesting in that regard. But here are some of my suggestions to you guys with regards to the development. So here are my suggestions, and you guys can play with this. I believe that what we can do is create mini sections on the major compounds that will be discussed with relative brevity. So perhaps not every single compound, okay, because that might end up being boring, the major compounds. And in doing so, touch upon key points, including the commercial use. So for instance, Alondra is focused on platinum. Well, we know platinum compounds are heavily used for anti-cancer purposes, but we also know that they have a lot of toxicity. So with regards to this, key things like what type of drug is it? So platinum, it's a metal-based compound, it's a small molecule, and brief ideas of mechanism of action. And I also think to kind of make this section coherent is I believe that you guys should all create one figure that encompasses these compounds that will be discussed in this part of the article. Because in that way, we're not having multiple different little figures of the compounds. We have just this overview of compounds, and you can probably divide them into categories. There may be organic or whatever features that these particular compounds are. And another thing that I think will be helpful, and it does not have to be a big component of this, it can just be a small paragraph. I did see that a lot of you refer to assays that are used for this purposes of measuring cytochrome C release, and even, obviously looking at the induction of apoptosis. But I think that's something to highlight, because if you see this article as a potential use for, your audience, well, they may want to be like, oh, well, what can I use to be able to measure cytochrome C? And so it will be very helpful to highlight some available resources for this purposes. Okay, so this is my suggestion to you guys. And again, I'm recording this, but also will supply this information to you. All right, so next is focus on strategies that directly apply cytochrome C. So here I found the key players to be Adriana, Javier, Chiara, Lisby, and Miguel. So from what I could perceive, these players, for the most part, talked about nanoformulation or MISO. So nanoformulation, what I mean by a nano drug delivery system. I saw that Lisby also presented a few other examples, like the use of a cell-penetrating peptide and a solubilized form of bovine serum albumin. So I thought that was a very interesting, collection of delivery systems. But I think what we can do, because what I want to avoid this being is a collection of paragraphs that are just a summary of each paper. That is an absolute no. That's not going to be the way that we will write this article. What we would do is we're going to formulate this into a consistent format where we will emphasize the key structural features in the delivery system. So by that, I think we can create a table of things that we can emphasize. For instance, the size of these, if you're talking about nanoparticles, what is the size? Because that's something that we will have a lecture on nanoparticle use, and size of nanoparticles is actually really important in terms of delivery of cargo. Shape, if there's any information on that. What stabilizing agents are being used on these compounds, on these drug delivery systems. Any built-in redox response factors, for instance, a redox response factor, something that is sensitive to acidity, something that's sensitive to hypoxia. Are there any receptor recognition motifs that can allow for a receptor-mediated entry into cells? What about drug loading capacity, right? What about drug release? Because these are going to be important factors in terms of how effective is that particular delivery system in terms of capturing the cytochrome C and also releasing it, and what is that mechanism of release? Another really important thing is release as it correlates with activity, because I have seen a lot of papers where they build these really fancy and multi-layered compounds, but at the end, when they report their cell activity, is really not that impressive. After all that work, it ends up being sort of, a little bit of a disappointing end result. And so that's something that we can touch upon, not as a criticism of any particular article, because that's something that we should never do, is criticize any particular author, but that can be part of our critical assessment, and that'll be something I want to talk about in a moment. And another thing is to emphasize, is in that delivery system, is it simply a sole delivery of cytochrome C, or is there another drug being used? And do we see something from that combined use? So another component is the critical analysis of these systems. For instance, the advantages of the delivery system. So I believe it was Adriana gave a few examples of cytochrome C itself being used as a nanoparticle. All right, is that advantageous? Is that advantageous versus some of the silica-based nanoparticles? Another thing that we should also keep in mind, all right, is feasibility. How expensive would it really be to create some of these systems? How easy would it be to actually reproducibly synthesize these to the extent that they would require? Are these systems truly effective? And by that I mean, you create these fancy systems and have cytochrome C, encapsulated, but perhaps the cytochrome C then doesn't retain its native structure and it loses some of its activity. So yeah, maybe you're able to capture quite a bit of it, but maybe you just don't have that effective of a system anymore. And if there is a combinatorial treatment, was there any synergism observed? Like, for instance, if you have cytochrome C and let's say a platinum compound, was there a synergism there? Or, was it the same thing as maybe just treating both of them, separately? And obviously cytochrome C has to be treated with something because it's self-impermeable. But these are things that we should address as far as the critical assessment. So what I don't want to see, again, is just a complete summary of every single paper. No, what I want to see is an applied. What are these different features of these systems, and how beneficial as a whole in terms of our critical analysis of these delivery systems? Okay, so then the next component, so the multi-drug resistance as related to apoptosis defects. So here the key players I observe to be Andrea, Vanessa, Chiara, and Rafael. So here I felt that all the players presented material related to apoptosis reversal that adds to the complexity of effective therapies. And something that I believe, I'm not sure why it keeps freezing every so often, so excuse me for that. Let me just have a little delay here. Because this is not actually a heavy file, for whatever reason it's delaying. But what I think that we can do in this section is build off of the general problem of multi-drug resistance. So we should introduce that problem that goes beyond just apoptosis, but then narrow the scope to the apoptosis reversal issue. And why this particular component? Because it's directly related to the role that cytochrome C plays as far as triggering an apoptotic pathway. And so I saw that Andrea had really nice articles that focus on anastasis, okay? I also saw Vanessa had some really good material about this idea of therapies reaching a point of no return, meaning that we're trying to reach a point where you can avoid this reverse of apoptosis. And I think that's going to actually be something in reality is really hard to capture, but at least to get an idea of generally what that entails, right? But also this section can be really useful as far as critical analysis. And what I mean by that is possible factors to consider in future drug application, or maybe they're already being considered. I don't know. That's what you guys are looking up. In drug applications with cytochrome C, for instance, I saw one of you talked about the use of multi-drug resistant modulators. Are people potentially incorporating this in their formulations with cytochrome C? All right, so that's something you guys can speak to. And if that doesn't exist, then that's something we can talk about of possibly incorporating. Another really important thing that I was thinking about, I was reading your annotated bibliographies. At what point should cytochrome C be used? Like, would cytochrome C really be a good frontline treatment, or potentially would it be a good second line treatment? So what do I mean by that? Well, we already know that there are certain drugs that operate by inducing this, the cytochrome C release and triggering apoptotic pathway. But then over time, certain tumors can become quite resistant to the actual drug. So then perhaps cytochrome C may actually serve more effectively to kick in at that second line point where you basically have consumed the use of the frontline compounds and then start using cytochrome C to overcome some of those issues that have become built up due to the resistance towards those drugs. So perhaps then cytochrome C may be more effective in that regard as a second line treatment. And we know in general, there is never going to be a one drug approach towards the treatment of cancers, especially some of the more severe cancers. But we can think about it in terms of the course of treatment. And that is why I had you guys do a cycle of care. So you can see that it really isn't as simple as let's just treat this cancer with this one drug and that's it. There's actually layers of treatment. So we can think about it in this context. And then we can also think about need for strategies to overcome faulty mitochondrial, the apoptosome, that might be factors that need to be considered when thinking about certain applications, such as the use of cytochrome C, as far as their effective strategies. All right, so these are things that I think that this particular group can really lead into, is giving us an overview of the multi-drug resistance problem, specifically as it pertains to apoptosis, but helping us to go and think beyond. Like, now that we have all this information in hand and all these different applications that have already been done, what's the next thing? What can we now contribute? And think about us as speaking to the future of these applications. All right, so this is the way I saw the breakdown from what I read. Obviously, you guys have the liberty to develop the article as you see fit, but I just wanted to share my assessment from what I saw from what you guys had developed, and I will share this with you guys so that you guys can start to now compile your work. So keep in mind, again, it was going to be one manuscript that you guys are going to submit to me, and following the guidelines is about the figure making, about the storytelling, and I would like to see these ideas implemented, but you guys are at the liberty of how you want to tell your particular part of the contribution. All right, so before we end, any further questions you guys have with regards to the material?
Yo tengo un comentario, pero no sé si me escucho bien porque estoy en el trabajo.
I can hear you.
Me voy a escribir. Ok, pues déjame buscar lo que tenía escrito. Que yo pensaba que I was thinking that a good merger between the first approaches we were talking about, like the chemotherapeutic ones, and the ones that are more like cytochrome C directly delivered to the cell. I have a paper that says that many of the chemotherapeutic agents produce DNA damage that leads to p53 dependent apoptosis. And it says there that the loss of the p53 tumor suppressor pathway contributes to the development of most human cancers. That we can like merge the disadvantage of not targeting the p53, that merger, that the loss of the p53 tumor, how it inactivates the apoptotic response, and then offer the solution of the most targeted drug delivery systems of cytochrome C. I think
Yeah,
that would be a
I
good
think
way to
that's
go
brilliant.
because
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's
I think
absolutely
it could be
brilliant
like a
because
merger.
I think that would pertain. If it has not been done so far in terms of the applications currently with cytochrome C, it certainly is a very important one to try to target that pathway as well, the p53 tumor suppressor one. I think that would be brilliant. Yes, I agree with you.
I think Liz by have an article that linked cytochrome C with p53.
Yes, there was definitely a mention
Yeah,
of p53 pathways.
in a combination. I think that somebody has something like that. So that was a very interesting one that I even have a question about it. I said, how would p53 contribute, to better the apoptosis? I didn't say, the toxicity of cytochrome C. I didn't say it, but that was a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And so definitely, if you found material that fits into places that I didn't necessarily have you, at least because remember, I'm looking at it from the perspective of how I read things, but you guys obviously, where you want to take your material. Please share this information with each other. We're all co-authors in this manuscript. And I think that'll be an excellent contribution there. Anything else, guys? We all set then? We're going to have brilliant paper. All right, everyone. Everyone's pretty much quiet besides Adriana and Luis and Vanessa. But I hope that you actually are paying attention. All right, then. So have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.